In the 20 minutes or so that I have left, I'm going to see if I can get into Unit 10. So we've left Unit 9, which was, architectural plans, and Unit 10 is foundation prints, right? So foundation is going to be what's holding the building up. So what are we going to try to do here? We're going to try to identify the footings. We're going to just describe different types of foundation support systems and identify the components of a foundation system, right? So what are the different ways that we can hold the building up? That's what we'll talk about here in the 20 minutes or so that we have left. So what are some of the types of foundation systems? In residential construction, a footing and a continuous footing and a foundation wall is going to be probably the most common solution. We'll see what a grade beam is. In larger commercial construction, we might have different types of foundation systems, piles or caissons, right? If we have a heavier building that we have to hold up, we need a different foundation system to support that heavy building, right? Think about holding up the Sears Tower is different than holding up Charlie's grandma's 2-flat, right? Same idea. We're taking the weight of a structure and conveying the weight of that structure to soil, but it obviously happens differently for the Sears Tower, which weighs a lot more than Charlie's grandma's 2-flat. I don't know, Charlie, if your grandma has a 2-flat, but right, so what are the footings? The footings are the feet in which the building rests. That's okay. Well, maybe someone in your family has a 2-flat, Charlie. It seemed to be working out okay when I was riffing on that. I'll try something else. Typically, we'll see those shown as hidden lines on the foundation plans. We'll see what that looks like. Must rest on undisturbed earth below the frost line. So what does undisturbed mean? Undisturbed means hopefully we can find some soil that hasn't been dug up before, hasn't been disturbed before, that has the ability to bear the weight of the structure that we want to put on top of it. Below the frost line, what is the frost line? The frost line is the depth to which the ground typically freezes in the wintertime. So we want our footings to be below the frost line, right? We know that when water freezes, it expands, right? All the people in Texas who never thought about this before now know about it, right? Because all the pipes burst in their buildings because water expands when it freezes. So if we didn't dig our foundation down, if we didn't put our footing down below the frost line, if that ground happens to freeze and it expands a little bit, then our foundation would move around. It would heave, right? It would raise or lower, and we would get cracking in the structure. Yes, that is correct, Diana. You've correctly anticipated what's on my next slide. Yes, 42 inches is the frost line in this area. So we reinforce our. It's okay. Not a problem at all. I'm glad you're one step ahead of me. That's good. I just have to remember not to go to the movies with you, right? It'll be a spoiler alert. Ayana's going to tell me what the end of the movie is before we get to the end. So yes, spoiler alert, frost line in Chicago is 42 inches. We use rebar to reinforce that poured concrete. And we size the footing based on two things, right? How heavy is the structure that we're trying to hold up? And what is the nature of the soil that we are placing our structure on? Right, so here's a map of frost line dimensions, right? So you see here we are in Illinois, about 42 inches. So if you happen to be building a structure up here in International Falls, Minnesota, right, frost line depth may be, 8 or 9 feet. You're digging down pretty far to get your footings below the frost line depth. And if you're in Texas, you're probably scoffing, saying, "Oh, I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff." Well, yeah, you don't most of the time, except when you do.
So in Florida, even it says 0, but aren't they like at or below sea level? Does that, well, I guess I should say, do coastal areas, like when you're at or below sea level, does that impact, even though I know it says frost line and they don't have frost, but does that impact the footing?
Yes, I would say if you're in Florida, you're going to have a whole different set of considerations, right? You still have to hold the building up, so you still have to go down to find, undisturbed soil for your building to bear upon. So yes, you may still have to dig down 4 feet, but you're digging down 4 feet for a different reason than frost.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously building, the fundamentals will be the same between building a foundation in Chicago or International Falls or Miami Beach, but there'll be regional differences. Same concept, taking the weight of the building and having that weight of that building bear on the soil, but it's going to happen a little differently depending on the conditions. Right? Remember back to our first or second class, we talked about the I codes, the IRC, the International Residential Code. Right? So this happens to be for Oak Park. These are local amendments or local addenda for Oak Park. And it tells us, in the case of Oak Park, and I'm guessing you folks who did the building codes assignment would have found the same thing, right? It tells us the climactic criteria that apply to our area. And yes, here's our 42-inch frost line depth. Right, so we want those footings to extend below previously undisturbed soil, right? We're still looking for ideally digging down deep enough to where the soil hasn't been disturbed before. So we want to be below the level of undisturbed soil, below the frost line. So that's the depth of the footing. How deep does it have to be? Right, here's the width of the footing. Width of the footing says a minimum of 12 inch. Probably a good rule of thumb is twice the width of the foundation wall. But again, that's going to depend on the soil conditions. And these numbers here, as we'll see on the next slide, 1500 lbv, that's load bearing value. So how much weight can the soil take? So if you're building a residential building, you are likely to assume what the soil conditions are based on what's typical for all the other houses that you built in that same subdivision. Maybe if you're a developer somewhere along the line, you're going to do a soil test and you're going to figure out what the bearing, what the load bearing value of that soil is, and you're going to design accordingly. But yes, you see that as we get to bedrock, bedrock or sedimentary rock has a much higher ability to bear the weight of a building than these loose soils that are going to be typical closer to the surface. So again, if you're building the Sears Tower, as you'll see, you're going to drive pilings or caissons down to bedrock because you have a much higher ability to take the load of that building than you do at the shallower soils. Right, so here's a typical footing. Right, a footing is going to support the concrete foundation walls. We quite often have this little keyway. Keyway is where the foundation wall and the footing come together. Typically, these are going to be poured in separate pours. Right, we're going to pour the footing first with, right, here's our rebar extending horizontally. Here's another piece of rebar that's going to be sticking up out of the footing. And then we'll use that rebar when we pour the foundation wall. Right, so here's our wall and our rebar in section. And here's that same wall and rebar in elevation, right? Here's now our horizontal pieces of rebar. And there's a vertical piece of rebar here. Right? Remember, rebar is that reinforcing bars. We saw number 4 rebar earlier in the evening. 4/8 of an inch or half-inch rebar. Right, so here's a picture of a footing. So I don't know where this is located. The footing depth isn't that much. It's a little hard to tell from the picture. So this might not be in Duluth or International Falls, Minnesota. But you see the footing poured here with rebar extending up above. Right? Another picture of footing.
Yeah, I just have one quick question. So they place those rebars into that like wet concrete, or the bars were there first and then they poured?
Yes, very good question, Nicole. Yes, the rebar is going to be, they're going to build the forms, then they're going to set the rebar, and then they're going to pour the concrete. Yes, yeah, the rebar goes there before the concrete does.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Sorry, Ayana, but yes, good question.
No problem.
Yeah, this one I'll have to figure out where my wife got these pictures from, because this looks like a little bit different, right? This isn't a wooden form. It looks like they're pouring into this almost like a bag. So I have to find out more about this. And here I don't see any rebar either, so they might be doing something different. Right, so if we just looked at the footings, right? Here's our, in plan, here's our foundation wall. Here's the dotted line of the footing that's wider than the foundation wall. If we are supporting a column, the footing for that column is generally speaking going to be wider than this footing for the foundation wall because we're supporting a more concentrated load, typically for a column, than we will be for a continuous foundation wall. So again, here's a dotted line of our footing, and you see the dotted line here extends out a little bit more because that column is going to need to bear on more soil than the footing is, right? There's going to be weight coming down on that column, and that the weight has to be supported by that soil. Right, same thing here. Here's a foundation wall, footings, column footings. TOF would be an elevation for top of footing. I'm guessing that this is referring to an elevation given somewhere in the drawing set. Right, we're not, the ground grade isn't 0, grade is going to be something else, right? Grade might be 95 feet or something, right? So here we'd be, or 92 feet, and top of footing might be 5 or 6 feet below grade, depending on our frost line depth.
Can I ask a quick question about that last picture?
Sure, of course.
So we're looking down because it's a plan view. The dotted or the dashed squares, that represents the footing. Why doesn't it continue along? Why isn't there a footing that connects those two squares? I guess is my question.
Yes, I'm going to guess that this is a, it's not clear here, but this is probably this is a grade beam, which we'll get to in a minute.
Okay.
So this is taking a more concentrated load here. This is taking a more concentrated load, and there's no footing under this section of the foundation wall. That this is actually a grade beam.
Okay.
So more concentrated load, no load, more concentrated load. That would be my interpretation.
Okay.
And same thing here, where this is a column line here, so I'm guessing there's more of a concentrated load here on this column line than there is on the rest of the wall. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. Let me do a few more of these, and I see we're already getting to. I could do this all night long. Actually, I couldn't do this all night long because I want to have some dinner here pretty soon. But again, here's another example of a foundation plan, right? We see, in this case, it says T footing, right? We saw TOF before as top of footing. Here's TFTG, top of footing elevation. Here's a column. Here's column lines. And right, these would be sections. Right, same thing we saw before. This is going to be a section of the foundation wall. So this would be the number of the section or detail and the sheet on which it's on, just like we saw in architecturals, except now we're looking at, right, we're into structural plans, so our drawings will typically say S instead of A for architectural. Let me see if I get to a break line. Right, here's foundation and footing lines and elevation, right? So here's our foundation wall, and here's our footing in elevation. It's again shown as a dotted line because this is all showing things that are below grade. Right, here's an isolated footing that's holding up this back porch. Here's two little isolated footings that are probably extending out from the plane of this wall that are holding up this porch. Okay, I will stop the fun right here. Any questions? Okay, I'll post an announcement probably tomorrow. Again, we're going to be in the architectural studio, which is in the G building. I think it is G306, but let me ask my wife quick. Sorry, G304. So I will be in room G304 on Thursday evening, probably 6:45-ish, depending on traffic, and I will finish this lecture and we will do the activity for Unit 10. And maybe perhaps if people have elbow room to spread out drawings and ask questions, things will go more smoothly. We shall see. This will be a science experiment.
Excuse me. There's room for between the two rooms for 20 people to spread out.
Okay. Yeah, my wife reminds me we have, if you're going to come to Triton, remember you have to do the Campus Clear app. So hopefully you have it on your phones. You have to have a mask, right? We're coming into public. We're going to be socially distanced. So I'll have areas designated that you can sit. And if every single one of you showed up, that's going to be too many people. So hopefully a few of you want to stay home, but if some of you want to get some extra help, hopefully this will work better for us. And I will put an announcement out with more details. Any other questions? Well, hopefully diving into the details the way we did on Delhi, looking at things in plan and section and elevation is helping you to put the pieces together, right, Vaughn? That's my objective here, is to help you tie these things together in your mind. So hopefully on some level I am moving in that direction. You're very welcome, Nicole. Yes, you're welcome, Charlie and Vaughn. Less intimidating. Yep. Okay. Maybe we'll do that. Yeah, it's as an instructor, you have to try different strategies to reach your students. So I'm sensing that some of you aren't getting this yet, so I'm going to try different ways of reaching you, and hopefully maybe we're getting together and rolling out drawings will help us put the pieces together. We will give that a try. Well, thanks for good class, and we will see you either physically or virtually on Thursday. Hold on a second, Charlie. I will answer your question in a text. Actually, I'll answer you in a chat and by email as well.